what's left over from this decidedly uneven exchange is a progressively larger pit, or a more destitute population who can't quite figure out that getting paid is actually to be robbed, and that there are the victims. Welcome back to this segment of Datum Line, Economic Myths and the Science of Deceit, Part 9. You know, as I mentioned on the other side of the break, debt is the undelivered portion of an economic exchange. In other words, it's a sum of money due. So, being the undelivered portion of an economic exchange is another way of saying that. And there are trillions of dollars owed to the private sector economy by a thieving Uncle Sam and Federal Reserve System, who happened to have stolen our grandparents', or maybe it was your great-grandparents' gold back in 1934, and they also stole my parents', or maybe it was your grandparents' silver back in 1965. They've got a history of stealing, okay? But oh no, say the engineers of monetary science, government pays for those notes by providing lots of legitimate services like highways, welfare, educational courses in religious, political, and economic stupefaction, foreign aid to our diabolical enemies, glorious wars for corporate enhancement, and, of course, the blessings of rapidly rising public debt. The authors substitute the word payment for the word theft, as though they were synonymous. Government contractors like General Dynamics, for example, are robbed of their production with government checks, which are insidiously called payment, which General Dynamics will then has to pass on to the next victim in order to get something tangible for what Uncle Sam will never pay to General Dynamics. So let's see. General Dynamics could join the act, and they could write good checks against no funds, maybe to get their factory labor. And then, if those checks come home to roost, the company could tell their employees to pass those checks off at the grocery store and other businesses in exchange for what they really want in life. When the worker demands payment on the checks, he'll be told that modern economic theory is just too complex for a blue-collar worker to understand. His paycheck is backed by the full faith and credit of General Dynamics, which builds jet fighters for Uncle Sam, the United Nations, the Israeli government, and not backed by gold and silver. Now, it sounds pretty convincing to most people, and modern economic theory, along with legal tender forcing acts, are what keep this shell game going. Contract law also shares a feature of this charade in that it relies upon the timely objection of a damaged party to initiate an inquiry as to whether a criminal act may have been perpetrated. Now, so long as the victim can be kept in the dark by hobbling his thought processes with a brain-twisting vocabulary, his awakening will remain impossible. By coloring a criminal confidence game with polite and legal-sounding rhetoric, the victim cannot escape from the deception, except that he seek, perhaps, the truth of God's Word. That's about your only hope. Most folks are content with living a lie, so long as it imparts a warm and fuzzy feeling. You know, the feeling that you get when you pass a Federal Reserve note to the next victim to get something useful, while subconsciously realizing that the bank downtown will give you nothing tangible for that dishonored Federal Reserve note. The banking cartel didn't grow their global empire by using the limited skills of a common thief. It's by controlling the essential economics vocabulary in which we speak, think, and act that this house of cards is held together. Even the Federal Reserve critics draw from the same wellspring of rhetorical nonsense, which is why the only sin of central banking that they can identify is private ownership, which is not even a sin cognizable at the Anglo-American Christian common law. Well, let's move on to point number 17 in the foundation stones of a credit money system proposed by Mr. Warren and Mr. Thorner. Number 17, the key to stability and the quality or value of money lies simply in maintaining a balance between the flow of Treasury expenditures being issued into circulation, debt-free, they say, and the flow of interest and tax collections from the private sector back to the Treasury and out of circulation. Oh, no, this is a marvelous one. I'm going to insert a couple words here to maybe give you my take on this, and hopefully you see the light in this. The key to stability, they say, in the quality of value of money, which they mean is credit, lies simply in another team of regulators maintaining a balance between the flow of Treasury expenditures being issued into circulation as empty conveyor buckets. 100% debt is what that is, not debt-free, and the flow of interest and tax collections from the private sector back to the Treasury and out of circulation. Now that payment of taxes is actually the third tax that you're going to pay in a system of triple taxation. And I see we're coming up on a break, and I'm going to have an awkward time trying to cover too much more here on this side of the break. But this is simply an instant replay of our present Federal Reserve System. It's the victim's labor, and not Uncle Sam's readiness to buy back his IOUs, that will continue to impart psychological value to lawless credit instruments and keep the criminal confidence game going. We're on point number 17 in the Truth in Money book. This is a principle that's basically adopted by the populace. I'm not just picking on Mr. Thorne and Mr. Warner. This is a very popular point of view, but they just happen to enumerate many of the principles that they believe in, and I believe that every one of their principles is a myth. And now, myth could be factual, but in this case, this is a non-factual. This is a fictitious myth. And the key, they say, the key to stability and the quality of value of money, and of course they don't use anything as money, so again, by using that word money, they continue to reinforce the illusion, just as the Federal Reserve reinforces the illusion by using the word money and loan and pay and repaid and so forth. But they say the key to stability and the quality of value of money lies simply in maintaining a balance between the flow of Treasury expenditures, those are the empty buckets going out to collect the coal, being issued into circulation, and the flow of interest and tax collections from the private sector back to the Treasury and out of circulation. And as I mentioned, this is simply an instant replay of our present Federal Reserve System, which does exactly the same thing. These folks just think that they can do it a little bit better. Now, the Federal Reserve runs the same system from which these authors and other monetary reformers wish to save us. And isn't it amazing that on both sides of this false paradigm, the victimized public are robbed with credit and then cunningly made to bolster their own confidence in the continuation of this fraud and theft? My hat's off to the Rockefellers, Bank of America, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, the Schiffs, Kuhn Loeb, the Warburgs, Rothschilds, and all the others who convinced the public that without bankers to lend us nothing, we'd be crawling around naked on all fours, eating slimy bugs, living in caves, and howling at the moon. And the authors honestly believe that Peter Cook was the first one to discover these great principles of monetary science. But you know, a well-known economist actually preceded Mr. Cook by many years. I'm going to go to Economic Consequences of the Peace, written by John Maynard Keynes, the economist. This is page 225, my 1920 edition. And here's what Mr. Keynes said, quote, "If government refrains from regulation," now the monetary science people would say mathematical regulation because it sounds so much better, but nevertheless, they're both talking about the same thing. If government, says Keynes, refrains from regulation, and how does government regulate the economy, by the way? Well, it does it by taxes and by interest on federal loans. Okay, also does it by statutes. The worthlessness, he says, of the money, and by that he means fiat money, becomes apparent, and the fraud upon the public can be concealed no longer. John Maynard Keynes said that in 1920. That was in his book in 1920, and he certainly was thinking about that before 1920. Now, if we turn to the 1980 annual report for the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond, Virginia, at page 10, we'll find the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond quoting John Maynard Keynes in his book called A Tract on Monetary Reform, at page 136. And this he wrote in 1923. Quote, "In the modern world of paper currency and bank credit, there is no escape from a managed currency." End quote. So you see, Peter Cook wasn't the first to figure out monetary science. In fact, the bankers figured it out a long time ago, because once you replace money, lawful money, gold, silver, and copper, with bank credit, it is a regulated system. It must be. And as Keynes says, there's no escape from it. That's what socialism is, folks. Now, our credit system, the one that we have today, has been centrally regulated by Congress and the Federal Reserve for nearly a century, with taxes and interest used to pull excess dollars, so-called, out of the economy to prevent inflation from destroying Uncle Sam's ability to confiscate your wealth efficiently. Taxes and interest are what convince the public that government and the Federal Reserve System need your fiat money in order to get what they want. Well, they created it. They don't need yours. Now, under a monetary system, that might have been true. But when applied to a credit system, taxes and interest take on a completely new purpose. That is, to conceal the fraud and to bolster the public's confidence in a devious system of compensatory theft. Let's turn to point number 18 in the Treasury credit money proposal of Mr. Thorne and Mr. Warner. This is the last one now. Here they say that, quote, the only purpose of federal taxation is to enable the Treasury to maintain a balance between flows of Treasury expenditures without exceeding an affordable maximum interest rate. I'm going to put some words in there and embellish upon this. The only purpose of federal taxation is to enable the Treasury to maintain a balance between flows of Treasury expenditures. That's your first tax. That's 100% theft. Those are the empty buckets going out into the economy to pick up the coal that you produce. And monetary revenues, that's the third tax. I skipped the second one, but I'll get to it in a moment, which is used to conceal the fraud and the theft without exceeding an affordable maximum interest rate. You see, the only purpose for taxes is not so government can buy what government wants, but rather to balance the flow of dollars in and out of Washington to control inflation. And inflation is the second tax, or the depreciation tax. The longer you hold those dollars, the less they're worth, through what people call inflation. But the first tax is when you give up your goods and services to get those dollars that Uncle Sam and the Federal Reserve System as a symbiotic team get for nothing. What you have in your bank account in terms of dollars that you have earned is proof of the tax you've already paid. You were robbed with those. And the only way you can get compensated is to find another sucker who's willing to take those things and give you something for them. But the longer you hold those dollars, the less they're worth, and that's the second tax. The third tax is when government has the audacity to tell you that you owe some of those dollars back to government, which got those dollars in the first place for nothing. That's your third tax. And that third tax, again, is used to conceal the fraud and to bolster your confidence in this system. Interest rates are raised to pull more excess dollars out of the economy.